It's a privilege to welcome Ambassador Haqqani to the BYU campus. He is quite familiar with BYU and shared with me that he had hoped that his daughter would come to BYU. So it really is a privilege to have him here. It's tempting to draw the full material written up in the Washington Diplomat about the ambassador and his appointment, but that would steal from his lecture time. I would like to just focus on a couple of things. Last evening I had the privilege of reading an article that had been written about him, and I love this reference to him. An active Islamic activist, a war correspondent, a savvy politician, a beloved professor, and an aide to two rival Pakistani prime ministers. He's had a delightful and interesting background. As I have been with him just in the short period of time, I believe that he's been a man raised up for this time, for the contributions he has to make in representing his country and for blending together the efforts of the United States and the government of Pakistan in a very critical and crucial time. Ambassador Haqqani came from a very humble background. He indicated that growing up, one of the interests was that their home was not air-conditioned, but there was an American library that was. He is very bright and gifted, as you'll see, and he became self-educated in spending time in the library. He was educated at the University of Karachi, receiving both a bachelor's and master's degree there. He became a war correspondent, covering the Afghanistan war with Russia. He came into politics. He has followed that, and there was no turning back, he said, after he became involved. But then he came to the United States, working with the think tank, and also became a professor of international relations at Boston University. He is well published. He's often on television and radio. He's written a lot of opinion editorials, and it's our delight to welcome you to BYU at this time. Ambassador Haqqani.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peterson. Of course, you've set me up in a way in which now I have to be interesting, which means I can't read this. You began by telling the story of how I wanted my daughter to come to BYU, but we never finished that story. The other part of it is that she, being a rather smart alecky teenager, came back to me and said, "Dad, I'll give you 2/3 of your wish." So I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I'll go to NYU, that way you get the YU, but and I get the N instead of the B." So all the things I was trying to stop her from, she's still in that den of iniquity called New York. I would have been happier and a little more comforted if she was in Provo. Let me begin by saying that the topic of my presentation today, the transformation of Pakistan, requires a little bit of understanding of why we are even talking about the transformation of Pakistan. As most of you would know, and those who don't should, Pakistan was created in 1947. It was created after a relatively short argument of only a few years between the Muslim minority of what was then the British-controlled subcontinent of India and the non-Muslim majority, especially the Hindu majority. And the problem was that the British had taken over the subcontinent from Muslim rule. And so Muslims, while they were rulers, never felt that they were a minority, because after all they ruled the place. So they were numerically a minority, but they were the rulers. When the British came in and the idea of democracy came about, a problem arose as to, will we as a religious group be a permanent minority in a democratic India when the British leave? And some people, not all, but some people argued that maybe the way to ensure a better future for the Muslims, who were about 27% of the total population of the subcontinent, would be to create a separate country in the areas where they were a majority. So what is today Pakistan and what is today Bangladesh were the areas of the larger British Raj that had a Muslim majority. But here's the problem. To become a state and a nation, you have to have some historic elements that bring you together. And what was bringing Pakistan together was just one element of commonality. People spoke different languages. They came from different ethnic groups. They had different cultural and historic backgrounds. And while they were part of this big empire called the British Raj, if the British Raj was to dissolve, then their multiple identities would assert themselves. And the one identity that was common was religion, Islam. But then, if you make a state or create a state based on the commonality of the religious identity, then obviously some people will start arguing that the religion has to be interpreted the way we want it. Pluralism falls apart because that often happens in religion. Some people will start arguing that our interpretation of the faith should be the only interpretation of the faith. Whereas to run a pluralist state or a democratic state, you need to be able to say, my interpretation of faith is important for me, but I respect your right to have a different interpretation of faith. After all, there can be different paths to God. And that recognition is important. So Pakistan's evolution has been essentially one in which, in fact, I have a book on this subject. And I've learned since I moved to the United States that promoting your own self is not a bad idea. So the book is called Pakistan Between Mosque and Military. And it's available on Amazon.com, and shipping and handling is free these days. Great Christmas gift, guys. So after the commercial, let me come back to the text. And basically what happened was Pakistan was created in a hurry. It inherited 1/3 of the British Indian Army, but only 17% of its economic resources, and almost 1/4 of its population. So the economic resources outstripped both the size of the military and the size of the military outstripped the size of the economic resources, and the population was greater than the economic resources as well. The first problem that Pakistan had was handling these two wings. What is today Bangladesh was East Pakistan, what is today Pakistan was West Pakistan. So how do you have a country with 1,000 miles of another country in between? The only way you can do it is the way the United States does with Alaska, having a friendly country in between. But because of the circumstances of the partition, India and Pakistan did not start off in the same friendly way as the United States and Canada have now become over history. So Pakistan ended up becoming a Western ally, primarily out of fear of India, and its leadership, in my opinion, mistakenly, decided that they are going to try and patch over differences by having an authoritarian state rather than a democratic state. And that authoritarian state will try and create a semblance of unity through religious symbolism, instead of allowing the people to exercise their franchise. And so Pakistan has ended up under military rule for most of its history. Pakistan's been an independent country for 61 years. It has been ruled for almost 40 of those 61 years directly under the military. The other period of 20 years of civilian rule also has been very complicated. Governments alternating quickly, the military behind the scenes dictating to the civilian governments. And so, when I talk about the transformation of Pakistan, I see the first area of transformation for Pakistan to be a transformation from this authoritarian history to a democratic future. And the reason why democracy is important is that Pakistan already broke up once in 1971 when East Pakistan decided to become Bangladesh. They chose the name Bangladesh because Bangladesh identified with their language and with their ethnicity. They are Bengalis. They decided that the religious factor was not sufficient for them to remain part of Pakistan. So other ethnicities in Pakistan can also assert their ethnic claims. And that would create problems. Pakistan, as it is very important for the world in terms of global security for the young people around here. If I were to put you to test, which I won't, out of respect for you, but what are the three things that make Pakistan one of the most important countries in the world? Number one, it's a nuclear weapon, it's a nuclear armed country. Very important. Number two, it's the second largest Muslim majority country in the world. 160 million people with more than 95% of the population Muslim. Third, it sits at the crossroads of three very important geographic regions. If you look at the map, And I always advise young Americans to always look at the map every now and then, because that is one of the things that really does tell you what the world is all about. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of young people in the U.S. don't look at the map as much as they see television, which then results in situations where they don't know the location of Montana, let alone Pakistan. So when you look at Pakistan, you will see that Pakistan is down there, just above India, on the left here on the map, and it sits at the crossroads. On the one hand, it is linked to the Middle East, to the south and the west. On the other hand, it's linked to Central Asia, to the north, and to China. And then it's linked to India, which is also a very important country in the world, with 1 billion people opening up to capitalism, really becoming the second largest market now available to the world, other than China. And China and India are the fastest growing economies in the world today. So in political and strategic terms, Pakistan's location makes it sitting at the crossroads of these three regions, very crucial regions. And if Pakistan starts to splinter apart, that does not bring stability to the world. The world needs Pakistan to stay together. And the only way Pakistan will stay together with minimal strife is under a democratic government, where people are able to resolve problems and debates and discussions and arguments. Many, many years ago, I read Karl Popper and his the Open Society and Its Enemies. And one of the things that Karl Popper says is that the great thing about democracy is that democracy resolves three of the oldest issues about governance. What are they? Number one, who should rule? Number two, for how long? And number three, how do you change rulers when you don't like them without bloodshed? Those are the oldest questions in history. Think about it. Who should rule? That's how they came up with the idea of divine right of kings and law of primogeniture and stuff like that. But democracy resolved that. The person who gets the maximum number of votes shall rule. Second, for how long? For a period that is determined under a constitution. And the third, how do you remove a ruler you don't like? It's not a question of whether they're a good ruler or a bad ruler. But when you don't like them, how do you remove them without bloodshed? And so that brings a measure of stability. I think that there is a universal consensus now on the value of democracy. And I'm glad to report that Pakistan is on the path to democracy. Pakistan had free elections on the 18th of February. Yes, Pakistan's leading politician, Benazir Bhutto, a woman that I worked very closely with and loved very much, she was killed and assassinated on the 27th of December last year in the run-up to the election. But the result of the election was that the people of Pakistan did not vote for people who supported the Taliban's vision of the world, but for Benazir Bhutto's vision of the world, which is the vision of reconciliation between faiths, of reaching out to the West, of having a democracy, a modern democracy in which people can have their faith and yet be modern. And so the first transformation that Pakistan needs to complete is the transformation from an authoritarian, military-dominated culture to a civilian, democratic government that works and delivers. Pakistan has some serious problems. More than 90% of school-going age children in India go to school. More than 90% of school-going age children in Sri Lanka go to school. More than 90% of school-going age children in Bangladesh go to school. Only 58% of school-going age children in Pakistan go to school. So something's gone wrong. Now, as wearing my professor's hat, I would say not as ambassador but as a professor, we made a mistake perhaps in looking at our national development only in terms of providing means of physical security. So we developed nuclear weapons, we developed military capability, etc. But that meant we underinvested in our children. We underinvested in our schools. We didn't ensure that all our school-going age children would go to school. We didn't invest in a healthcare system that would enable all young people and all old people to have healthcare. But that creates another problem. The poverty and the difficulties of a torn society, which is trying to make a transition from being a faith-based society historically to a modern society in which faith is crucial, but there are other things that matter as well, like generating wealth, like gross domestic product, the ability to be part of globalization. For all of that, The people have to have a stake, and then the government has to deliver to them. So the first transformation from dictatorship to democracy. The second transformation is the transformation of the people from a culture of militancy to a culture of entrepreneurship. Pakistan's president, Ms. Bhutto's husband, Asif Zardari, the new president, he has said that what he wants is for young Pakistanis to grow up with education, to have access to the means of modern production, and make Pakistan into a nation that produces more. I mean, Pakistan is a land of 5 rivers. It can have wonderful agriculture, but Pakistan's agricultural growth is around 1%, which is minimal. Only 4 or 5 decades ago, Pakistan's agriculture was growing at 5-6%. And it can grow much more if you apply modern techniques. You have land that is plentiful. Hey guys, we know that there are parts of the world where people have had the guts to make the deserts bloom. So it's easier to have rich soil, and you can actually invest in it. And so that is where Pakistan has been badly run, but is not a place that is necessarily doomed to failure. Some people have used the term failed state, etc., in the past for Pakistan. They are wrong, because what it has been is failed government, not failed nationhood. Failed government, not failed state. So the second transformation that Pakistan requires is a transformation from militancy and the ideas of militancy to a culture of entrepreneurship and productivity. Why is that important? Well, look, here I'll digress a little and talk in general about the whole Muslim world. The Muslim world as a whole, and we are talking about 57 countries with significant Muslim populations, more than 1 billion people of the Islamic faith, there's a general crisis in the Muslim world. And I could do a separate lecture on that someday. That's my next book, by the way. And the biggest problem in the Muslim world is that if there were Nobel Prizes in the year 1008, guess who would have got them all? It would have been Muslims. Baghdad had the biggest library in the world. The Muslims were a big empire that stretched from Morocco on one end all the way to Indonesia on another. Several of the inventions of that period, 11th, 12th century, the Muslims were ahead in everything. Their military was much more developed, etc. And then, of course, the Muslims as people made some critical miscalculations and wrong judgments. For example, when the printing press was invented, the Muslims decided we don't want the printing press. So for 273 years, there was no printing press in the Muslim world when there was printing press in Europe. And guess what? The printing press transformed everything in Europe because it opened up the battle of ideas. And so the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, none of it would have been possible without printing. Because, can you imagine the Reformation with handwritten little notes going across Europe? I don't think so. I think printing facilitated it. And America, the whole the building of America, I think the printing press had a lot to do with it. The whole concept of ideas being transferred much more quickly and fast. And so the Muslim world fell into decline. And when the Muslim world fell into decline, it became colonized. Now, the conventional view in the Muslim world is that we have become weak because we were colonized. My view is slightly different, and I say that the Muslim world became colonized because it had become weak. It had become weak in ideas. It had become weak in militarily, in economic productivity. The West invented the joint stock company. The Muslims did not. And as a result, the West invented banking and insurance, and the Muslim world did not. And so the economy started falling behind. If you're living only on what you have, off the land, then the ability to generate wealth is a lot less than that of those who have invented new means of generating wealth. Of course, some of those new means of generating wealth have now reached the point where they don't generate wealth, but only generate bailouts, but that's a different subject. But the Muslim world's crisis has resulted in creating 2 different trends within the Muslim world. One is we need to work with the West and learn from the West. I represent that trend. Benazir Bhutto represented that trend. Many Muslim leaders represent that trend. But then there are those, and the name that comes most easily to anyone would be Osama bin Laden, who say, you know what, we have a score to settle with the West. We need to destroy the West to be able to compete with them. We can't compete with them like in ideas, we need to destroy them. And this destructive tendency has found a lot of supporters amongst the poor and the dispossessed, because after all, everybody wants to come up in life. And so if you have to listen to a 25-minute lecture by me and followed by 35 minutes of questions to figure out what's wrong with you, you'd rather listen to a 5-minute speech by Osama bin Laden that basically just says, let's go destroy them, guys, blow yourself up, that's the future. And that debate in Pakistan has been taking place, unfortunately. And so a lot of young people and a lot of people have been affected by it, which is why Pakistan has had the problems it has had. So has Afghanistan, the whole neighborhood. Part of it, of course, also came about because of an error of judgment by international powers, including the United States, that when they were fighting the Soviet Union and communism, they thought, let's play on this religious sentiment. Let's tell these guys that their faith and their religion should be the basis of opposition to the communists. And so these mujahideen, as they were called in the 1980s, and terrorists, as they are called in the 21st century, this transformation has taken place here. In the 1980s, I met bin Laden as a reporter way back in 1987. And bin Laden was not a bad guy at that time, in the sense that he was supposed to be part of the mujahideen who were fighting the communists. Nobody thought what happens with this mindset when they turn around and start fighting us. And so that's a window on the complexity of the problem. But these militants and their way of life and their mindset needs to be transformed. And it needs to be replaced by a mindset that recognizes that modernity has benefits, that entrepreneurship has benefits, that like you all, and I'm sure many of you are people of faith, that you can have faith and modern aspirations. You can want a nice car and have faith. In fact, you can pray to God for a nice car. And so that is the transformation we need to attain in Pakistan. Transform an entire population from a mindset which talks about historic glory and restoration of ancient glory, partly through a conflict with the West, into, hey guys, there are opportunities here, let's work with them. And let's get educated, let's find ways of enhancing our productivity, let's make our agriculture more productive, our per acre yields, our per hectare yields can go up. We need to be inventive, we need to be innovative, we need to be productive. The entire Arab world, for example, registers fewer patents in a year than are registered in the United States, in a day. So there's a lack of innovation, there's a lack of productivity, and so Pakistan is going to lead, or that is the transformation that we want to achieve, that we're going to transform from this culture of militancy and historic complaining and saying, we were victims of injustice, which we were, because, after all, we were colonized, but instead of complaining about it, we're going to do something about it and transform that. And one of the objectives of the new government in Pakistan is that we will raise our literacy levels and within 5 years try to get all our school-going age children into school, which will then have far-reaching effect. Improve the tertiary education, change the curriculum from just delving into historic grievances towards productivity and modernity. The third transformation is also very significant. The third transformation is that since its inception, Pakistan has looked at itself as sitting at the crossroads of conflicts. We sit at the crossroads of the Middle East, Central Asia and South Asia, and we look at ourselves and we are part of every conflict. We are part of the Middle Eastern conflict, we are part of Central Asia's conflicts, and of course we have a conflict in South Asia, including one with India over Kashmir. Anyway, so we sit at the crossroads of conflicts. Well, we need to transform that from a crossroads of conflict to a crossroads of opportunities. How? Look at the map again. The Middle East is a producer of oil and gas. India and China are major consumers. If there are pipelines to be built that are direct, that bring natural gas from the Middle East to India, where will they run through? Pakistan. If there's going to be a land route from China into the Gulf, into the Arabian Sea, closer, so that China can also benefit from the energy resources of the Middle East quicker and faster, Again, it would have to be through Pakistan. Central Asia, the stans, which are all gas-rich, or not all, but almost all. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, then even further. All of them will have to run. So the pipelines would run through Afghanistan and Pakistan. And similarly, trade routes. Historically, about 1,000 years ago, there used to be something called the Silk Route. And the Silk Route went through this whole area, which was people brought silk from China all the way into the Middle East because that was the richest part of the world. Europe wasn't that rich at that time. So they came into the Ottoman Empire, etc. They came through the Silk Route. The traders came through this. Revive the trade routes. Stop being sort of, at the center of conflict and start being at the center of opportunity. Let the trading begin. Let the oil and the gas pipelines come in. Let the energy corridors. Pakistan, for example, blessed with sun light most of the time. And so, same goes for India. If we could develop solar energy that is cost efficient, production of solar energy is cost efficient, we could be a major supplier of energy in the region apart from fulfilling our own needs. Wind energy. We are working on all of these. So apart from we will be the energy corridor for the region. Before all of these transformations are accomplished, we have to finish a little war. Not that little. Significant war. That is the war against terror, which, as you know, after 9/11, its principal theater has been Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan on 9/11. He and his cronies are still somewhere around there, either on the Pakistani side or the Afghan side along the border. We hope more on the Afghan side than on the Pakistani side. But there are these people. That have to be found, identified, and fought with. And they are backed by Taliban, who have created an insurgency on the Pakistani side that threatens our own security. A big difference between the previous government, led by General Musharraf, and our government is that General Musharraf told the Pakistani people that we are being forced to fight this war because America is too big and America has told us either we are with it or against it. We can't afford to be against it, so we are fighting that war. The elected government, led by Mr. Zardari and Prime Minister Gilani, has taken the view, this is our war. What does that change? What does that transform? It enables the people to actually relate to the issues of the war. It's one thing if you are fighting America's war in return for some economic benefits. It's another thing if you realize that this war is about the heart and soul of our own people, that we do not want these terrorists. And so, for example, the president now goes and says, guys, do you want the Taliban to put all your daughters and sisters in burqas and stop them from going to school? If you don't, support us. And that has had a tremendous impact. Only in the last 2 months, I don't know how many of you keep up with newspapers on this subject. In the last 2 months, there have been a lot of stories about how the Pakistani military is better motivated, the people have arisen, there's a tribal awakening, a bit like Iraq, and US-Pakistani cooperation has improved. The Central Intelligence Agency and the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence is now working together. And within the last few weeks, we have been able to take out several important Al-Qaeda figures, including one last night. And these figures are being taken out with cooperation between Pakistan and the United States. Of course, Pakistan does not like the United States and its forces operating on the Pakistani side. We are a proud nation. We have a large military. We would rather that our military was trained and we were the ones who operated on our side of the border. And so you every now and then hear of Pakistan protesting about American troops, etc., operating on the Pakistani side. But the fact of the matter remains that we are partners, and we are partners in it for the long haul. The war against terror is not going to be finished off in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So those of you who are sort of undergrads here, be prepared. Up until your middle age, you will be hearing about the war against terror unless we all turn lucky and find them all sitting in one conference room and get rid of them all. Because terrorism ain't going to happen easily. So terrorists, and then as long as the grievances that feed terrorism and that are used, and unless these ideas that feed terrorists are alive, and unless we win the war against them in the area of hearts and minds, then we will have this war for a relatively long time. But the United States and Pakistan, under its elected leadership, are partners and will continue to fight that war. So that, in a nutshell, is the vision of transformation of Pakistan that the current leadership of Pakistan is looking at, working upon. I think I should stop here so that the young people in the audience and the older ones as well can ask me some questions and we can elaborate on these themes. Thank you all for listening to me so patiently. I bet the applause would have been a few seconds shorter if I had gone with the written text. So who's going to ask the first question?
So given the geographical location of Pakistan and its importance as serving as a crossroads, how is Pakistan going to address the issue of nuclear proliferation and Iran, and what do you believe the U.S.'s role should be in working with Pakistan in addressing this problem?
Okay, very smart question, young lady. But here's the problem. The answer to that is classified. Pakistan does want to address the question of nuclear proliferation around the world. The problem has been that the non-proliferation regime in the world is a regime that was crafted in the 1960s, early 70s, when only 5 nations had nuclear weapons capability. The United States, the Soviet Union, China, France, and Britain. And so a non-proliferation treaty was signed which restricted area. 3 countries opted not to sign the non-proliferation treaty: India, Pakistan, and Israel. And it's believed that all 3 of them now have some nuclear weapons capability. I think that the question of proliferation cannot be addressed by addressing individual nations. It has to be seen in the global light, because as long as there are nations that feel insecure because of the strength of their neighbors, because the conventional weapon superiority of their neighbors. Remember, why did the US go nuclear? Do you remember that? It went nuclear because it was in conventional weapons capability on a global basis and retained the nuclear deterrent even after the Second World War was over, because the Soviet Union, in conventional terms, could put more troops in fighting NATO. The Warsaw Pact troops in conventional terms would be much greater. And so that's how the US nuclear doctrine emerged. And subsequently, of course, it became mutually assured destruction, which was a way of preventing each other from going at each other. So Pakistan has never said that its nuclear deterrent is going to be anything other than a last resort in case of a conflict with India. Pakistan's new leadership is also working with India to overcome our issues. Because if we are to be the crossroads of opportunity, we have to trade with India. We have to be friends with India. And we would like our difficulties, including the issues of Jammu and Kashmir, to be resolved in a peaceful manner, whereby we will never have to look upon each other as enemies bent upon mutually assured destruction. If we can reach that point, we can address the question of non-proliferation. Iran, again, the problem remains that as long as there isn't a modern, contemporary nuclear non-proliferation regime in which we can bring on board all countries, including Iran, just as North Korea has now been brought on board, we will continue to have countries that will want nuclear weapons as a weapon of prestige. And nuclear weapons are far too serious to be a weapon of prestige where, people go sort of, you've got one, so I'm going to get one. I think that the important thing is to ensure that Iran is made to feel secure and is engaged in a manner in which we do not have another nuclear weapons power in our region or in the world.
If you could please stand up and tell us your name and your major.
My name is Nephi Henry. I have a 2-part question. They're related questions.
And your major?
French studies.
Wow.
Number one is you mentioned partnership between the United States and Pakistan. In several, you talked about specifically the war on terror. I was wondering what forms that partnership has taken. Number 2, I've been to the India-Pakistan border. I don't know if the gate and the pomp that happens there. So I've been privy to some of that rivalry.
Yeah, the Wagah post, yeah.
And so those sentiments certainly exist, those sentiments of rivalry. And so I was wondering if the partnership between the United States and Pakistan is affected by the courtship, I think, that the United States has going with India, and what effects that might have.
Well, on the pomp and ceremony of that occasion, I mean, I would just say that there are certain rivalries that are made into ceremonial occasions, as there will be again on this Saturday, right here, in this state. So some people make that, and that's what happened between India and Pakistan. It's just fancy, it's like a great photo op, and everybody. All those guys are friends, by the way. They all eat together at night sometimes, They just do it, and this is a ceremony that takes place on the border between the Indian troops and the Pakistani troops. It's gone on since the 1960s, and they have these, they kind of give a high five to themselves and something else to the other side, and it's pretty, and it shows kind of, a machismo on both sides. That's what you're referring to. But India, Pakistan, look, India recognizes that India is right now at the threshold of acquiring a significant position in the world. It's opened up its economy. There were socialists throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. In the 1990s, they've opened up to the world. Now their economy is growing. They're one of the fastest growing economies in the world. They don't need conflict with Pakistan if they need to keep the momentum of growth. On the other hand, Pakistan understands that just as China's growth helped all of Southeast Asia attain higher growth rates, Pakistan can benefit. And we don't need to look at it purely in military terms. We need to look at it in big picture terms. Just as India and Pakistan have had 60 years of conflict, our nations essentially also have several centuries of historic commonality. So we can build up on that commonality. And I think we are working on building that. And I think that under General Musharraf, there was a tendency to look upon U.S.-India partnership as a threat to Pakistan. Under President Zardari and Prime Minister Gilani, the tendency is that we look upon the U.S.-India relationship as a positive thing for our region, and we want our friendship, this can be a friendship of all. The US can be a friend of India, it can be a friend of Pakistan. It's not an either or. There are benefits for Pakistan for working with India. The US-Pakistan partnership, for one thing, historically there's been a pattern in which the US quote-unquote used Pakistan for one thing or another in the 50s and the 60s as a base for flying U-2 missions, etc., into Soviet Union, and then kind of broke up with Pakistan because somebody in Congress got annoyed with one thing or another. Then the nuclear issue came in, and so Pakistan has been, in the last 60 years, it has been the most allied ally of the United States at times, and the most sanctioned ally at other times, facing sanctions. I think now there is a leadership in the United States, all round, bipartisan, that understands the significance of Pakistan and the need for constant engagement of Pakistan. I don't know if you're familiar with a proposal called the Biden-Lugar Bill, which Vice President-elect Senator Joseph Biden and Senator Richard Lugar of Indiana moved, it's called Long-Term Partnership with Pakistan, Enhanced Long-Term Partnership with Pakistan Act. And basically the purpose of it is to ensure that Pakistan will receive American assistance on a sustained and a long-term basis in the civilian areas where it needs most, while the military-to-military and intelligence-to-intelligence relationship will continue. So what we are now looking at is a longer-term partnership rather than just a military alliance. And that partnership will be multidimensional. In the war against terror, just to give you an example, all the major people in Guantanamo who belonged to Al-Qaeda were all arrested by Pakistanis for the Americans. All these famous names you hear, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shaib, etc., etc., it was American and Pakistani intelligence cooperation that got them. So that's the good news. The bad news is, what were they doing in Pakistan, guys? So, so there's more work to be done there. And that partnership is being enhanced. There are other areas of partnership. This whole transformation strategy will require American partnership. Pakistan and the United States are both nations that are based on an idea. If you look at it, France is France because it's France. Japan is Japan because of several centuries of history. America is a nation born out of an idea. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Pakistan is a nation based on an idea, protection of the right of Muslims to have their special way of life within the Indian subcontinent. And so all of these things are, these are factors of commonality that need to be built upon. I think that the US and Pakistan and the United States needs an ally that overlaps. Pakistan's good. Pakistan's like, Pakistan will fit in US Middle Eastern strategy as the easternmost anchor. It will be an important player in South Asian strategy as the westernmost anchor, and in Central Asian strategy as the southern anchor of Central Asia. Because all the Central Asian nations are landlocked. And what is their easiest port access? Through Pakistan. India has a lot to benefit from Pakistan. India's ports are getting clogged. Pakistan has only 3 ports, but it can build more along its coastline. And there can be train links whereby goods can arrive in Pakistan and be transported to India. Look at the map again. I know you're straining from there to look at it, but it can be done. And that's the way Pakistan can be a very critical player for American economic interests, American strategic interests, and American political interests. And then it's a country that, even though it's been under military rule, it has always been pro-American. Throughout the Cold War, and even now, its elite remains very pro-American. So those are all bases for developing this partnership further in the future. There was somebody here in the middle who had their hand up like twice or thrice, and they haven't yet received. Yes.
This is our last question.
Oh, sorry. Have I been talking too much?
My name is Brian Spiller. I'm studying political science. I think that as the war on terror has progressed, and the U.S. involvement in Iraq as well as Afghanistan, we've seen the projection of this war through different lenses, especially with the pan-Arab newspapers as well as Al Jazeera. How is that perception with especially the youth of Pakistan? Because we have seen the recruitment of several, like you said, why is the reason why we have seen some of these terrorist organizations within the borders of Pakistan? Do you see it as a threat that Al Qaeda and the Taliban, other organizations are gaining steam because of the U.S. involvement in Iraq?
A very smart question. I think that because immediately after 9/11, the U.S. decided to use military force without developing a strategy for public diplomacy, a hearts and minds campaign, etc. So unfortunately, even in Pakistan, the lens through which the war against terror has been seen has been the same as that of Al Jazeera and the pan-Arab press. It's been seen as the United States being overly muscular. A lot of opinion surveys indicate that a lot of people in Pakistan suspect that that Osama bin Laden's view that this is an attempt to impose a hegemony by crusaders and Zionists over the world, that's true, because the counterpoint of view has not been presented. Americans have become bunkered up after 9/11. The embassies in the Middle East and the Muslim world, if you go, they are like bunkers. People don't go out and meet. Very frankly, if you can't find technological means of communicating, create your own outlets to give the point of view. America has a point of view to give which hasn't been given. And the other side's propaganda machine has been far more active. I understand that General Petraeus understood that in Iraq, and I think he understands that for Afghanistan and Pakistan. And it's important to change that around, that this is not a war against Islam, that this is not a war against the Muslims, that this is not a war for Muslim resources. This is not a war for oil. All of those arguments you've heard even in this country. I think it's important to point out that this is a war against an instrument of warfare that is just unjust. Terrorism is not a means of war that is acceptable to the world, and that the terrorists and the ideologies they espouse, they need to be taken on. And all terrorists, irrespective of what cause they stand for, are bad. And I think that is a message that the US still needs to work on with greater detail and with more effort, both in Pakistan and in the greater Middle East. I'm sorry I gave such long answers to short questions and I could only take 3 questions. I would have loved to take more. But thank you all very much for being with me.